All right, I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, and I'm going to spend some more time in verse 21 with regards to the subject of knowing God. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 21, it says, "For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God." Okay, well, if the world did not know God, then how are we going to know God? All right. I want to spend some time with this. The first thing I'd like to do is talk about the failure of the world, why it is that they failed. The Gentiles are a little bit easier to talk about than the Jews, but I'll address both. With regards to the Gentiles, the general perspective of the Corinthians would be what's called pagan Greek philosophy. And a part of pagan Greek philosophy was about answering the question of if there is a God, who would he be? All right, that's a part of Greek philosophy. If there is a God, who would he be? And it turns out that the definitions that they came up with were just simply wrong, And why would I say that they were wrong? Okay, well, the easy way to address that is to compare what they believed with the scriptures, okay, with the Bible, because that is the testimony of who God is, what he has done. And, while the Greeks put out a tremendous amount of effort to say who he should be, what they came up with was inconsistent with who he really is. All right, and so that's why they fundamentally failed. Okay, it sounded good to them, but God didn't agree. He just did not agree. This is not what he is going to conform to. Instead, they need to conform to what he has presented. All right, now the first real public expression of who God is as a person was through Egypt. Okay, it was when God set the children of Israel free from Egypt that God took this opportunity to show himself to the world in a public way. All right, and through the plagues that he executed on Egypt, he compared himself with the gods of Egypt in order to show the people that their gods could not defend them from this God who would impose these plagues, and that he would overpower or be more powerful than the gods of Egypt. That was the introduction. Okay? And when he did that, there was documentation through Moses. There was documentation about these events and about the things that God had to say about himself and about the people. And he defined the nation of Israel. If we compare what the Greeks believed concerning a divine presence, it was not consistent with what is described in the scriptures. Okay, now there have been many attempts to do this, but this happened, this happened later through Catholicism and through Augustine, where Augustine was primarily the theologian who found a way to interpret the Bible from the perspective of Greek philosophy. But just because you interpret the Bible, the scriptures, from the perspective of Greek philosophy, that doesn't automatically mean that the conclusions are correct. And I'll come back to this a little bit later when I talk about the nature of the scriptures and looking at it from the perspective of a puzzle. Let me go to the Jews. Why was it that the Jews failed to know God? I mean, he was actively participating in their lives. What went wrong, right? I mean, what? Well, there were a lot of things that went wrong. If you study the scriptures, you'll see that the children of Israel interacted with God in in a very poor way, starting out with with Mount Sinai when he came down and he presented them with the commandments. He only made it through the first 10 before they said, "That's enough. We don't want to hear any more." When he said, "Now don't be coveting," they said, "Okay, that's a little bit out of bounds. You go talk to Moses, and then Moses will tell us what you have to say." All right, just to give you an introduction to when they had some difficulty in having God speak to them about various things. It was at that point that they effectively said, "We do not want to hear from you." Now, what kind of a relationship are you going to have with a person if you tell this person, "I don't want to hear what you have to say"? Where do you go with that, right? Okay, just to give you an example, and there are many other examples that you could look at with regards to the struggle that God had to reveal himself to these people, and it was quite a struggle. I recently went through Genesis all the way through 1st and 2nd Samuel, and one thing that was really noticeable is that God related to people as if they were in conflict with one another, which they were, in a lot of ways. But he really related to them in the context of conflict. When there is conflict between two persons, a lot of that conflict has to be worked out and resolved by defining the willful, voluntary behavior of the two persons who are relating to each other. And that's exactly what God did. He described himself and how he was going to relate to them in terms of his personal, willful, voluntary behavior. He said, "I am going to do this. This is what I am going to do." And what you do, you decide. You decide what you are going to do. Just that alone is opposed to pagan Greek philosophy. The idea that we have this choice, that we have this decision, that we would exercise our personal will. Well, what if it's contrary to the desire of God? How could that be? God can't allow that according to pagan Greek philosophy. And the theology of Augustine and the theology of Calvin, which is the same, that's just not acceptable. But that is exactly how I see God relating to people, where he would say, "Look, this is what I'm going to do. What are you going to do? Okay, you decide what you are going to do. And if you decide this, then I am going to do this. And if you decide that, then I am going to do this, instead." So let's wait and see. So God is just effectively saying, I will wait and see what you decide that you're going to do, and when you decide what you're going to do, then I'll decide what I'm going to do, and there's a lot of that just all over the place. That describes a relationship. It's not a very good one, and through that relationship, you can kind of get to know the Lord, in some ways. When I go through these passages, I can see him differently than how I saw him before I believed in the new covenant. I can see some differences. Now, there's no difference with him. He's still the same person. But I am not the same person. I've changed. I've grown. I've matured in what he has revealed to me over a period of time. And so I will see things that I had not seen before. And that's why I continually read the scriptures, is because I get excited about the fact that next time I read through that, he's going to show me something new. There's going to be something new about who he is as a person. All right. And so the Jews understood God in a limited way, okay, because he defined a specific relationship with them. They knew him by comparing him with other gods. That's a small way of knowing him, but it's not the same as really knowing him as a person. It just means that you know him as he is compared with other gods. It's not It's not quite the same thing. You know what he has done, and this is good to know a little bit about the things that a person has done and what they have said. But, I could say that there are a lot of things that I have done, good, bad, ugly, I've done a lot of things. And if you knew about all the things, all the good things that I have done, you wouldn't necessarily know me as a person by evaluating me according to all the good things that I've done, or even of all the things that I have said. By the things that I have said, there could be some things that you could know about me, but there's a lot of things you're just simply not going to really know and not really understand until we are interacting with one another personally. You and I and no one else, no one in between. Whereas we have a personal experience with each other, and through that, you'll get to know me just as I will get to know you. Okay, another obstacle that the Israelites were faced with was that God defined this relationship with them through a law. Okay, through the Mosaic law, he defined a relationship. Okay, and this relationship was if they would obey, then they would be blessed, and if they did not, then they would be cursed. But this doesn't really reveal anything to them about who he is as a person. He's just somebody who blesses them or curses them. And that doesn't have anything to do with what he thinks, with what he sees, with what he perceives, with what he knows. Who cares about any of that? Who cares how God feels? Or what does he think? It doesn't matter. Bless or curse. Okay? Either bless me or please don't curse me, but I don't care what you think. I don't care how you feel. I don't care what's important to you. That was the relationship he set them up with, was one defined by the law. And so the Jews did not have an opportunity to really know him as a person, and the law was a barrier, in effect, that was between them and him as a person. The law was a stumbling block. It was a big rock that was in the way, to use that example, that they would struggle with, that would be a barrier between God and the people. All right? When you look at the establishment of the nation of Israel, it's quite exciting. And you would think that, God is going to be close to these people. But no, he set up this barrier so that they wouldn't really be able to get to know him, because it was all conditional upon their obedience, which they could never do. And so the relationship would be him responding to their failures, because there would be no successes, relatively speaking. All right. What kind of a relationship is that? You got a relationship with a person who is just waiting for you to blow it and so that they can beat you up. Is that's not really knowing the Lord. That's just getting a beating from him. But that doesn't really help you to understand what's important to him, besides that, you behave. Okay. But that's not what, that does not deal with the issues related to what he knows, what he sees, what he understands, and what he wants, for himself, what he really desires and what he's really doing. So what was that about then? I mean, why give them the law anyway? Why create this barrier, when there's this profound opportunity, right? I mean, he really got those people's attention when he set them free from Egypt. That was quite profound, That was a global event. Everybody was talking about what happened through that, at least for a while. Why would he do that? Well, the reason why I believe that he did that was because he was addressing another problem. Okay, there was another problem that was created, or that showed up when Adam and Eve rejected God. Okay, this problem was with regards to the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, because Adam and Eve believed the satanic lie that if you only know what is good and evil, then you can be like God, or better than who you are now. And God, he doesn't want that for you. He doesn't want you to know what good and evil is, because you might be better than how he wants you to be. And they believed the satanic lie that if they only knew what was right and wrong, they could do that which is right, not do that which is wrong, and they would be better than if they had the relationship with God that they had. That was the satanic lie. Well, this is an open question that hasn't really been answered well. Okay? This is something that was left open-ended because God effectively said, okay, you're out of here. You're out of the garden. You go out and take the rest of the planet. God got to keep his garden, that little area, and they get the rest of the planet. You get out there and let's see what you can do. Okay? It got so bad that God flooded the entire earth and killed everybody except for 8 people, right? That's how bad it got. So, and they started over, and of course, there weren't very many improvements, of course. But the point is that this still has not really been resolved. So it was through the establishment of the nation of Israel that God was addressing this issue. It was through the giving of the law that he was going to solve this problem or answer this question. Do we live by the knowledge of good and evil, or do we not? He gave his contribution towards this great effort in giving the Mosaic law by saying, all right, this is a definition of what is good and evil. Let's see what you can do with it. Okay? And eventually, after hundreds and hundreds of years, there were a group of Jews who believed that they had succeeded in finding a way to live in complete obedience to the Mosaic law, to always do that which is good and to never do that which is evil. And they were the Pharisees. When they finally achieved this status, when they finally achieved this goal that they thought that they had achieved, it took God himself to show up personally and explain to them that he was not impressed. Okay, nobody else was going to do it, but he did that as Jesus in order to explain to them that he wasn't impressed with their belief that they had finally achieved sinlessness in that sense. And what he had to say about not being impressed mattered because of the miracles that he performed that could only be performed by God. So from the people's point of view at that time, they saw Jesus performing the miracles that would confirm that he is the representative of God. So what he has to say actually has importance. So when he says that he's not impressed with their lifestyle that they think that is going to keep them, from ever violating the law of God or to keep them from ever sinning, that sort of thing. When he says he's not impressed with that, then what he has to say actually has some significance, and it really does matter. Okay? So that kind of relationship that God had with the Israelites wasn't so much about, this is how you're going to get to know him as a person. It was about resolving the issue of, do we live by the knowledge of good and evil or not? And of course, this issue comes up for every person who has ever been alive on this planet. Okay, even today, it's the same thing. Everyone is born into this world, and they make it through their teenage years. They become relative adults, relatively speaking, and they will be confronted with this issue of how is it that they are to live? How are they to relate to other people? Is there a God? How can they get his approval or his disapproval? Right? And so What is the law that we live by? It's the same thing. Everybody deals with the same topic. It's an important struggle to work through. And we have the scriptures as testimony that will help us work through these issues. Okay? All right, so that's why the Israelites never knew him. When he showed up personally, they didn't know who he was. They had no idea who he was when he showed up, because if they knew who he was, when he showed up, they would know that this is him. Okay, but this issue, this struggle of living by the law, keeps a person away from knowing God as a person. Deep down inside, everybody knows that they fail. And so everybody knows or believes that God is ashamed of them, that he doesn't like them. He does not accept them. That in and of itself keeps people away from God personally. They don't want to get too close to him because this is going to be exposed. How is this going to be addressed? Of course, the only way that this can be addressed is through forgiveness, which is what God provided through Jesus on the cross. And that's what establishes a new relationship that can be built and that can be defined. All right, so how is it that we can know God if the Gentiles failed and the Jews failed? How are we going to succeed, right? Well, this is an important limitation to understand. Okay, it's a limitation that everybody's got. I have this limitation, especially where I cannot teach you how to know God. All right? That cannot be taught. I can't teach you how to know him. And I cannot give you a relationship with him. That's not possible. Okay? I know him in a certain way. I have a certain kind of relationship with him as a person, and I can't just give that over to you. For example, there are many of you who are watching this video, and you and I have a relationship of sorts. Okay, it is probably quite limited, but at least we have some kind of a relationship between each other. Okay, I can't give that relationship over to somebody else. If you're going to have a relationship with that somebody else, you're going to have that with them. I can't just take the one you and I have and just pass it on to somebody else and say, okay, now they have this relationship with you. It just doesn't work that way. Okay, that's the way of understanding a personal relationship as opposed to some kind of collective relationship. When God defined the nation of Israel, that relationship really was a relationship based on the collective, based on the nation. Fundamentally, that's what it was. So, there's no way that I can give you a relationship with him. There's no way I can teach you how to have a relationship with him. There's no way that I can teach you how to know God. This is something that can only take place between you and him. That is an important limitation to recognize, and to accept that those are the limits. There are some things that I can do. Okay, what can I do? Well, I can testify of the God that I know. That I can do. I can tell you about him. I can tell you the things that he has shared with me. I can testify. But if you're going to know these things really between you and him, you're going to have to talk with him about these things between you and him. All I can do is tell you what I have discovered about who he is as a person, what he's interested in, what he wants, what he is doing. All right? So that's an important limitation. I can clear away some barriers that people have that get in the way that keep them from knowing who he is. Okay? Forgiveness is the primary barrier. Whereas if a person does not believe that they have been forgiven, if they don't believe that God does not relate to them on the basis of their sin, if they don't believe that, perhaps I can help them get past that one. I can take that barrier away. God really does love you, and he really does accept you, not because of what you have done or haven't done, but because of what he has done for you. That's why he is able to accept you. And if you'll embrace that and be thankful, then you can move in the direction of knowing who he is. And that's about all I can do. All I can do is help you go into the right direction by removing barriers and by testifying of what he has shown me. Then you can be moved in the direction a little bit better than you were otherwise. And that's about as far as I can go. And that's about as far as you're going to be able to go in other people's lives, I'm sure, as well. You're not going to be able to relate to others, other friends you have, and give your relationship with God over to them. You're only going to be able to testify and help them work through some of the barriers that get in the way that prevent them from knowing who he is. Okay? There's also a big limitation with these barriers, that there's only so much he can say. What is he going to say? If he gets a person in his life who doesn't really believe that he doesn't hold their sins against them, how is he going to show them that he loves them? There's going to be some serious limitations. God's not going to be able to do much when it comes to that. He's not going to be able to share too much about what it means to be accepted. He's not going to be able to help a person really understand their inheritance in Christ very well, or even how to apply it. There just isn't a lot to talk about. This is the issue, is that it's not until a person accepts some of these basic fundamental issues and gets past them that God has much to work with, with regards to, what are you guys going to talk about? What are you going to do together? There's only so much that he can do. Okay, so what about the scriptures, right? This is the way that I have approached the scriptures, and you can approach the scriptures however you want. Of course, you should, you will, but this is the way that I can testify of the quality and the value of the scriptures. I look at the scriptures as like a big collection of puzzle pieces. If you were to put together a big jigsaw puzzle, for example, you would have the box, and you would have all the puzzle pieces. And what you usually do is you use the picture on the box to help you assemble all of these puzzle pieces, okay, to put them together so that they represent the picture that is on the box. Okay, but what if you do not have the picture on the box? Well, now you've got a real task on your hands, to determine how are you going to fit one piece with another. And you'll notice when you approach it that way that some pieces, they might kind of sort of fit, but not perfectly, but you still could very well leave them together, thinking that they are correct, and then perhaps correct them later when you realize that the other pieces would fit in there better. But that's a struggle, and this is a very simplistic example. Of course, eventually, I'm sure that a person would succeed in constructing their puzzle just fine. But with the scriptures, we're talking about a lot more pieces and a lot more difficulty. And if you don't have the picture on the box, the chances that you assemble all of these pieces together in a way that God intended is not so good. It's not impossible, but it's important to see that this is a difficulty. This is a serious difficulty. It's a serious challenge to be able to organize everything in a way that it fits in the way that God intended. There are a lot of people who have come up with all kinds of theologies that have been supported by many different pieces of the scriptures, many different verses that they have assembled together, and they've come to a conclusion that God definitely would not agree with. And I know that because I can compare that conclusion with a bunch of other pieces that these people will tend to either ignore or not be aware of. You can compare these conclusions with other pieces and see that it just doesn't fit into the whole picture. It just doesn't do that. It might fit if you consider a part of it, but it doesn't fit into the whole thing. All right? And so the scriptures, to me, are a collection of pieces that need to be assembled. And without the Lord speaking to us about these individual pieces, I don't think it's going to be likely that a person will get very far in this regard. The reason why I say that is because of myself. When I was studying the scriptures, before I came to know the Lord, before I believed the gospel, when I was studying the New Testament and the letters that Paul wrote, to include this one, when I first considered the things of God and I was studying the scriptures carefully, I did not know the gospel. I did not know the Lord. And I'll tell you, there was a day that came when I closed my Bible and I pushed it to the other end of my desk and I prayed with great sincerity. I said, God, I have been studying this for longer than, I can think of right now. And, I can tell that I don't understand a word in this book. I don't understand anything that's in here. And I don't know what to do. And so if you want me to understand what's in here, you're going to have to do something, because I can't do anymore. And I just simply refuse to read the Bible anymore, until he explains something to me that I could work with, because I didn't understand a word in it. And I noticed that, I came to that conclusion. I could see, I don't know God, and I don't know what this is about, and I don't know what this means. And if he doesn't do something, then nothing's going to happen. And I figured it would take a long time, like maybe years or something like that. But it was only 3 weeks later that I was listening to the radio and somebody spoke about the gospel in the context of sin, death, forgiveness, and the restoration of life. I had never heard that before, and so I thought, my goodness, that's something that I did not know. I'm going to open up the scriptures, and if that is true, if it is, I'm not saying it is, but if it's true, then how would I perceive a number of, several of these passages that are related to this topic? And sure enough, as I opened up the scriptures, I was reading through them, and it was as if God snuck in and rewrote the entire Bible on me when I wasn't looking, because I wasn't reading it anymore. Somehow he must have snuck in there and he rewrote the whole thing, because while I didn't understand everything, I understood some things, okay? A few, there a couple, there was a few that I see that. I understand that now. I didn't understand that before, but I see that now, and then we got started. We had something to talk about. The Lord and I had something to talk about where I said, is that really what you're thinking? Is that really what you did? And then he would confirm in my heart, in my spirit, yeah, that's what's going on. That's the way things are. And then later, I would relate to him differently, with an understanding that he was okay with me. And I could relate to him on that basis, and I could ask him questions about things that were going on in my life. I would ask him, well, what do you see here? What do you understand over here? When reading through the scriptures, I would ask him, with what's going on here, what were you thinking? What were these people thinking? And sometimes he would share something with me. Most of the time he wouldn't, but sometimes he would. And I knew it was him because it was something that I know I never would have come up with. So obviously it has to be God if it's consistent with everything else he's shown me so far. If he's consistent with the gospel, with sin, death, forgiveness, and the restoration of life, if it fits in there, chances are, The chances are good that this is true. Okay, now I still had my own struggles. Things like I'm still living by the law. I'm still living for the lifestyle of repentance and obedience. I'm going to live by the law. And there was a time when I saw that I was free from the law because of forgiveness. And this wasn't right away. This happened much later in my faith. And when I realized that I was free from living a life of obedience to the law, I didn't know what to do anymore. The last law that I had to let go of was the Sabbath law. And what I was able to see was that I needed to rest from my works to include the work of resting. Okay? The videos that I produce that are on YouTube on the book of Hebrews in chapter 4, that's the place to go to hear me speak about that in more detail. But when I saw that, I thought, okay, well, I definitely don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what to do for God. I don't know what not to do. I don't know anything. And so I prayed and I spoke to him and I informed him. This was an informational prayer. I gave him a notification. I told him, listen, I don't know what to do. And so I'm not doing anything until you show me what to do. Okay? And of course, did he show me what to do? No. No, he didn't show me what to do at all. But he did continue to show me what it meant to live in his rest. And I grew more to understand his acceptance, his love, all right? And that he could involve me in some of his purposes. He would ask me, would you go speak to this person over here? And that happened once, or many times, but one situation I'm thinking of right now. And I remember I asked him, I said, why do you want me to go talk to them? Why do you want me to go talk to this guy? What am I supposed to talk about? And he wouldn't say, and so I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, I guess I just got to go. And so I went over and I told him, I said, I understand that, we have some differences. The Lord told me to come over here and talk with you, but he didn't tell me what about. So I thought maybe you'd know. And sure enough, he said, well, there are a few things. And so, okay, I'll just, we'll just talk about that. Well, I'll listen to you, whatever it is you got going on. Because he didn't give me any instructions concerning this. He didn't give me any information. I don't know anything. He just said, listen, would you go over and talk with this person for me? And that's all I got to go on. So this is a way that you can understand how a relationship is built, and what a relationship can be. This is the relationship that I have with him. If I could pass it on to you, I would, but I can't. So you have to build your own. And you do this through pursuing your God, of asking him questions and studying through the scriptures and asking him to show you things. And in daily life, you see somebody and you ask the Lord, what can you tell me about this person? And maybe he'll share something, maybe he won't. But it's through that personal interaction that your personal relationship with him becomes real. And it's in that way that things get significantly improved. So what does God really get out of all of this? We can talk about what we get out of this, but what does he get out of this? What God gets is a person who he cannot create. Okay, I'm going to say that again. And if you're making notes, this is a good thing to write down. God gets a person who he cannot create. Okay, he can recreate us as a born-again child of God according to the gospel, but that's not the same as this relationship that we get to have with him on a personal level, on a personal basis. where he gets people in his life who are in his life because they want to be in his life. He has people who get to know him because we want to get to know him. With the Greek, it's, we're in his life because he has imposed himself on us. But in the New Covenant, this is not about him imposing himself on us. This is about us seeking after him because we really want to know him and we want this relational experience with him. He responds to that, as best he can, depending upon what kind of barriers we have in the way of the things that we believe that are not true. I gave you some examples of barriers that I had to work through and why and what happened afterwards. Okay, so he gets a person in his life because they want to be in his life, and he gets a person who knows him because they really do want to know him. And this is hard, okay? And it's hard on purpose. It's difficult on purpose. God made it difficult. He made it hard and so difficult that from the point of view of the people in the world, it's just foolishness. That's how difficult he's made it, in order to just get those very few people who are so determined to know who he is that they'll get past, no matter what foolishness there may be, and whatever doesn't make sense, they'll get past that somehow, and continue to pursue him to the point where they will get to know who he is. Okay, and remember my examples where I would say, where I said, I gave, they gave the situation where I told them, I'm not reading your Bible anymore. That's it. I'm done. Until you do something. You do something now. And then he did. Okay. With regards to how I'm supposed to live, I have no idea how to live now. You're going to have to do something now. It's your turn. Okay. Because I'm not going to live by the law anymore. I don't know what to do, but I'm not going to do that. So until then, until you do something, it's your turn to do something. You got to do something, and he did. I didn't notice it right away, but he did. And over a period of years, I eventually saw what he had done. I asked him the question, what did you do to me? Something's, how did I get here? And then he showed me the different stages and the different steps that he worked with me on to get to the point where I was at that time. Okay, so that's what I can say about knowing God. In verse 21, he says that they did not know God. For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know him, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. All right. Now I just dropped my notes, and so I can't read the question offhand. I'm going to reach down and grab them. Hold on a second. And I just read through. I dropped my notes on this. Here's a question for those of you who are using this for your small groups. This is a tough one. Okay, so you might not want to take this one. So I got an alternate one as well. Here's the question: how do you know God? All right. That's a tough one. So I got another one. What can you do to know him more? All right. That one's a little bit easier. And I'll continue in the next message. Thanks.